Today, for Devotions with Daniela, we are reading White Women Get Ready: How Healing Post-Traumatic Mistress Syndrome Leads to Anti-Racist Change. This is something I've been reading a little bit at a time for my own process of deconstructing the delusion of white supremacy. And if you are interested, you can get signed copies, regular copies attached here. I'm typically, okay, this is a chapter called Post-Traumatic Growth. I'm typically a confident student. But when I was first introduced to the concept of internalized oppression, I felt daunted by the task of identifying the specific ways I had acted out racism. It helped that other white anti racist facilitators shared how they saw it in their lives. But it was the swift push to facilitate that really motivated me to work the analysis. I was often the white person in the room with the most experience, and after only attending a few trainings, was urged to take a leadership role. Despite, or maybe because of, the jolt of panic that shot up my spine when asked to share about my internalized oppression, I quickly embraced the formulaic aspects of the analysis. I entered these trainings intending to vulnerably talk about my internalized racism. But when I tried, my distancing emerged. I gravitated toward the long list of manifestations, ticking off the boxes one by one as I went down the list, tracing each historical thread. After a couple months, I could tell you which familial patterns this form of my racism was linked to, and which historical events had inaugurated it. In fact, I have. These pages contain many of those reflections. Noticing these manifestations in myself was easy, since there are many. Noticing them in other white people was even easier. This self criticism was not a new skill. I'd been honing an analysis of what was wrong with other people, and especially what was wrong with myself, for decades before I ever set foot in an anti racism workshop. The workshop's intent was not to shame or chastise white folk, yet that was the toxic shame culture in which my anti racist analysis took hold. The tools meant for liberation provided new words with which to judge myself and others. I still believe that identifying the ways in which we uphold harmful systems has incredible value, but I'm also learning how, when planted as a monocrop, honing a critical analysis can yield paralyzing despair. A downward spiral of despair might not appear as distancing on the surface. A well articulated critique might not seem like a dissociative response. We might not interpret self criticism as a way of checking out, especially if we are doing the anti racist thing of naming our racism or of naming the racism of other white people. In discussing toxic shame, Bell describes the policing of other white bodies by those in the work. Bell notes that toxic shame within anti racism can produce perfectionism and policing of others, judgment, elitification, virtue signaling, and performative gestures. This form of blaming ultimately cuts us off from staying present to experience with what's happening, to the experience with what's happening. We can extend this policing to self blame as well. The policing of our own white bodies, the internal distancing from parts of ourselves we don't like, and the identification and judgment of our internalization of oppression further disconnects us from ourselves and each other. Those clear cut anti racist critiques were what I thought liberation work was supposed to be for white people. But now I am aware of how the monocrop of critical analysis might not have been as transformative as I once presumed. I have become more sensitized to my replication of harm, more attuned to compassion. After I closed out the white women group video call, I sat for a moment feeling responsible and questioned my leadership. How had I modeled self awareness in a way that led to such intense despair? I felt responsible to make a change, but wasn't sure how to shift it. What could we do to shake it up? How could we get out of the downward spiral of self loathing critique? Then an idea came quickly. What if I asked the group to write love letters to their internalized white supremacy? What if we could embrace our racism rather than trying to eradicate it? What if we tried to love all the parts of ourselves? These questions may sound odd, even like a contradiction to what you've read thus far. And in total honesty, they felt risky to pose. But in that moment of downward spiral, I realized that one way white women group had been using realized one way white women's group had been using the master's tools. We had been going after our internalized racism with more internalized racism, trying to root out the violent parts with the tools of violence. We had been afraid of our fear. We had been loathing our aversions. As a testimony of how deeply we have internalized oppression, we had been using its tools to try to make it go away. And I had been modeling it all. What had been missing in my fellow white ladies' spiral and in my own self criticism was practicing self compassion for all aspects of ourself, even those parts which are racist. Perhaps this was the moment I started to truly love other white ladies. Perhaps this was the moment I began to practice deep compassion for myself. What had I cut off in order to police other white people? From which parts of myself did I have to disconnect? The white ladies and I ended up writing a series of blog posts in response to the prompt. I appreciate their honesty. Not everyone was convinced that white people loving our internalized racism will move us away from racism. Mostly, I think it's the edgy, uncomfortable contradiction we need to be working within, though some days I have my doubts. It could also be a terrible idea that encourages white people to spiritually bypass the embodied realities of harm. Even as I still have my doubts, I can see the fruits of holding my flaws and my racism with compassion. Compassion offers me the spacious adaptability to get curious about the harm I've been part of, rather than to judge and resist it. Compassion is helping me to differently enter relationships in which I have felt responsible for identifying another white person's relationship racism or for identifying my own. And for all of white women groups' flaws, we had been trying to unlearn our racism together. It turns out that it's the interpersonal ways of staying present that help keep our nervous systems online. According to Dr. Porges, it is through our social interactions that we, as humans, have evolved to alleviate defense based trauma responses. We are deeply psychologically attuned to each other's facial expressions, muscle tension, and vocal tones. We are designed to emotionally regulate together, to help each other move out of defense and into connection. In examining our internalized racism, perhaps we have been attuning to each other's despair, but we could also use it to attune to each other's love. Shame is likewise a physiological evolutionary trait, which, as Bell notes, evolved to alert us to potential danger. Unlike toxic shame, healthy shame presents a temporary rupture within human relationship and is always met with swift relational repair. Within a healthy shame dynamic, we can receive correction. Or, as Bell says, I can take it if you have something you need to say, or if there's a behavior in me that you need to point out because it's potentially causing harm. Within this healthy shame paradigm, there's no need to get defensive, run away, or self loathe. There's no reason to deflect correction at all costs, because on the other side of correction is deepened, secure relationship. The healthy shame response and repair actually strengthens our ability to co regulate and our ability to be in solidarity together.